Don't buy the wrong TV in 2025. So you're shopping for a new TV, but if you're only looking at prices and specs, you're setting yourself up for disappointment. Because the best TV for you depends on what you watch and where you watch it. But no fear, I've tested the best TVs at different budgets and it's now time to make my recommendations. Here's FOMO's best TVs of 2025 by use case, room lighting, and real-world performance, based on your budget, of course. Hey friends, want to upgrade to Windows 11 Pro but can't afford the official price of $199? How about $21 or Windows 10 for $16 with my discount code SF20? Thanks to our sponsor, Whokeys. Yes, Black Friday is here. Get an additional 30% off with my code SF20. Go to Whokeys.com, add Windows 11 Pro to your cart, apply my discount code SF20, and bam, only $21. Here's how we activate it. Go to your Whokeys account at the top right under User Center, click on My Purchased Orders, click on View Keys and Code, click Get the Key, copy the Windows 11 Pro key under Code Card, then go to your system settings, scroll down and click Activation, click Change Product Key, paste the key code, click Next, and you're done. So don't miss out on these amazing deals. Click on my links in the video description below. 98 inches, beginning with the value leader, TCL Q6. Yes, it's last year's TV, but still an excellent TV. No, it doesn't have HDR, amazing dimming zones, or anything like that. It's for basic TV watching at a huge scale. If you enjoy the movie theater experience because it's big and immersive, this is the TV to start. It's great if you're coming from an older TV and you really don't care about HDR, don't even know what HDR means, you just want bigger. Well, this TV, 4K, great color, and it's big. I can't think of a better TV as a starter 98-inch TV. But for an extra $500 or so, I recommend you take a look at the TCL QM6K. This year's upgrade is quite significant. For just over $2,000, you're getting an anti-glare matte screen that definitely helps in bright rooms where you have a lot of reflections. And so this is the biggest jump from last year's TCL Q6 to the QM6K. miniLED brings that extra brightness pop, a little bit of HDR, but for me, the critical difference is definitely image processing and that anti-glare. So in those brighter rooms where you're seeing a mirror image of yourself on the glossy TVs, the QM6K definitely addresses that at 98 inches. But if you want to go even higher up the value ladder in terms of HDR performance and a bit more brightness, definitely consider the 100-inch Hisense U75QG. This was my poor man's Bravia 9 recommendation. It has great skin tones, great processing, and at 100 inches, well, if Sony had a Bravia 9, this would be what it looked like, but it doesn't. And the audio, literally the best TV audio I've heard all year. So you're getting a little bit of everything, right? You're getting great skin tones, a huge size, 100 inches, HDR impact, and probably one of the best TV audio you can get this year, cost no object on a TV. That's quite amazing. But you're saying, look, you got a little bit more money. You want to go even bigger than 100 inches. Take a look at the TCL QM7K at 115 inches. It's $13,000. Yes, it looks incredible, but it does have a glossier screen. So make sure you have some light control so that the glare from your windows around you doesn't distract you. But this TV, definitely bright enough, great for gaming. I prefer TCL over Hisense for gaming, but most importantly, it's 115 inches, so close to the epic Hisense 116 UX, but it's around $24,000. And for an extra inch, $24,000, I'd start with a 115-inch QM7K first. Only if it's not bright enough, which I cannot imagine that it cannot be, then you might want to consider doubling that price to over $20,000. But $13,000 even then, I expect the prices to drop to below $10,000 by Black Friday. And better still, these TVs come in smaller sizes, 85, 75, 65 inches, 55 inches. So if you don't need it at 98 or 115 inches, you have options at smaller sizes. But let's say you're wondering, wait, I want Flagship. At the largest size they have available, 83-inch super performers. There are 3 of them available this year. And G4, G5. So G4 is last year TV, still great, still available, still for sale, but the G5 is this year's successor. Wow, primary RGB OLED. It is an HDR impact beast. And then you have the Samsung S95F, 83 inches, also using primary RGB OLED like the G5. And unlike the G5, it has a matte screen coating. So between the G5, which is slightly more glossy, right? If you don't have a lot of glare and reflections that bother you, G5 will do, or the G4, and we'll go over the differences between the G4 and the G5 that you may want to consider, and the S95F. And then if you have bad signal sources, as we talked about before, there's the Sony Bravia 9 mini-LED TV at 85 inches. So let's start with the G4, G5, right? Why did I include the G4? Well, it's still available, it's still awesome, and it's much cheaper than the G5 because it's last year's model, but it's still relevant because it's bright and it's OLED and it looks great. Perfect for mixed use, gaming, sports, a little bit of movie watching, right? Especially if your room's slightly bright, the G4 is definitely bright enough. And then you have the G5, this year's 2025 successor to last year's G4. Slightly brighter, slightly improved tone mapping, more color volume. I think this is a slightly better TV, but is it better enough to be paying an extra $1,000 or $2,000 depending on when you get the TV? No. If all you're watching is sports, news, regular TV content, the G4 is fine. The G5 is if you're willing to get it calibrated, you're watching a mix of content and you want some of the HDR impact, G5, 83 inches, great TV, but you are paying a premium. However, in a bright room with lots of glare, you may want to consider the Samsung S95F. Similar price as the G5, but it has that anti-glare matte coating that is very controversial. Some people don't like it, some people do, but one thing we all agree on, in a bright room with a lot of reflections, it eliminates it better than any other TV because it's the lesser of two evils. Would you rather see slightly brighter content, slightly better tone mapping, but then all that reflection is so distracting, what's the point? Versus having the anti-glare matte screen where you don't see the reflections, but you lose a little bit of contrast and there's that slight lifted black. Most people, and I say most, I've talked to a lot of people, they prefer removing the glare. Now, obviously, the ideal situation is to have light control. In a light control room, then both these TVs, the G5 and the S95F, look great. But if there's a lot of brightness and glare reflections in your room, get the S95F. I think you'd like the anti-glare in those viewing conditions. But there's one more TV I'm including in this list that's not an OLED. That's the 85-inch Bravia 9 for those slightly dirty signals. You're in a bright room, right? You're okay with the OLED versus mini-LED because mini-LED is good enough, but you know you got some questionable cable signal sources or over-the-air sources or whatever. I think the Bravia 9 is going to clean that up fairly well for you. Lots of people love the Bravia 9 mini LED. No, it doesn't have the contrast of an OLED, but what's the point of all that amazing contrast if your signal sources add more noise and like, this cable box doesn't look great on my OLED. And that Bravia 9 being released last year means you'll get the lowest prices for the Bravia 9 than ever before. But these TVs at these sizes are not yet the best. To hit true reference quality, you have to size down. 77, 65, and 55-inch TVs, that's where the best TV models are this year. So yes, the G5 does come in all the sizes from 83-inch down to 55 inches, but it did not win the TV shootout and had some weaknesses and flaws that the other TVs did better. So if you're looking at low light, low luminance HDR, the G5 struggles with that, right? It loses a little bit of color, there might be some banding or posterization. If that's important to you, you could take the G5 off your list. And at higher brightnesses, you lose a little bit of color, but the HDR impact is real. It gets brighter than any of these TVs. And if that's what you need, boom, the G5 is the way to go, and it's still one of the better gaming TVs available today. But I'd also recommend you consider the G4, last year's TV. You're going to get 95% of the G5 for a few $1,000s less, depending on the size you're getting. So that's the G5. But let's talk about the three TVs that many consider are better. We'll start with this year's new entry, Panasonic Z95B. And I say new entry because last year the Panasonic didn't quite make it to the TV shootout. It came later in the year. But this year, it was a new contender back after over 10 years of absence. And the Z95B really impressed. My personal favorite HDR TV of the year, and it killed it out of the box. The Z95B looks great. Skin tones, image processing, HDR impact. That Z95B comes in 77-inch, 65-inch, and 55-inch and is my best OLED TV of the year. So something to consider. Oh yeah, I forgot to mention TV audio as well. If you include all of that as a package, that's why it's my choice for the best OLED TV you can get this year. But the other two TVs aren't slouches either. You have the Samsung S95F, arguably as good as the Z95B. Maybe out of the box, it may not have that skin tone accuracy, but it's as bright, as punchy, and it's QD OLED. The Z95B from Panasonic is using LG's primary RGB OLED, so its color saturation is not quite up there with the QD OLED from the Samsung S95F, but arguably its image processing might be slightly better. So there's a give and take, and personally, I like both TVs. I would take either one, but if I'm in a bright room with glare and reflections, I might end up taking the S95F, but in a light-controlled room that I have, I still take the Z95B. But that's my personal preference. There is no wrong answer here. And the S95S arguably is the better gaming TV with 165 Hz native refresh rate, but many are arguing with a recent firmware update, you may lose HGIG temporarily. I know Samsung is fixing that, and they'll bring back HGIG. Yes, Samsung assured me personally at the TV shootout they're fixing HGIG. So I believe them. Now, what about the actual winner of the TV shootout? The king of TVs for 2025, the Sony Bravia 8 Mark II. Something to consider. First, it only comes in two sizes, 55 and 65. At 77 inches, you would have to get the Sony A95L, last year's King of TVs winner. Technically, it's not quite as bright as the Bravia 8 Mark II, but I don't think you'll notice a huge difference. It's great processing, XR clear, right? It has all the things that make Sony magical. And at the end of the day, Sony was the winner of the King of TVs shootout, but whether that's important to you is a different matter. I like all these TVs. The Sony, personally, I didn't think had quite the impact of either the S95F nor the Z95B for many reasons, right? I mean, the Sony, I'd probably still go with a Samsung S95F if I wanted a QD OLED, even with the matte screen, or the Z95B if I didn't care about the anti-glare, but I wanted that punch, right? And so ultimately, I brought home the Panasonic Z95B, and I'm leaving the Sony Bravia Mark II in the studio as my Sony reference TV. But there's no wrong answer here, right? Sony fans, Panasonic fans, Samsung fans, all these TVs came within decimal points of winning. It wasn't like one TV carried the day, with the exception that the Sony does have a great way of cleaning up sketchy signals. So if I had a bad cable box at home, I probably would have taken home the Sony. Have I spoken about Sony enough?
The client is not happy with FOMO.
Yes, Sony will have to send a message he'll understand.
The client is not happy with FOMO.
Yes, Sony will have to send a message he'll understand.